Greetings and welcome everybody. Today is a painful day for me because we're about to break down whether or not Phil Jackson is destroying the New York Knicks. Painful for me because I'm from Chicago and I remember Phil Jackson as the head coach of the Bulls during those 6 championships. And so, with that being said, I decided, in all fairness to Phil Jackson, I would at least go out and do my due diligence and do some proper research. Now, the first thing that I wanted to research was, when did Phil Jackson actually take this job? If you would have asked me yesterday, when did Phil Jackson take the job as the president of basketball operations for the New York Knicks, I probably would have said 5 years ago. But after doing some research, I found out that he only took the job in March of 2014. So we are here just approaching 1 month out from him being in the job for 3 years. I guess that goes to the impatience of the New York fans. It seems like he's been there for a lot longer. Everybody's always blaming him for ruining the New York Knicks. So, with that being said, let's see what the roster was when Phil Jackson came in, if he allegedly is ruining this team. Now, when he came in March, Mike Woodson was still the coach of that team. That team did not make the playoffs in that season. They did make the playoffs the previous season, 12-13, but in 13-14 they actually did not make the playoffs. And this would have been a team that he would have had to work with going into his first summer of free agency as the decision maker for the New York Knicks. Cole Aldridge, Carmelo Anthony, Metta World Peace, Andre Banyarni, Tyson Chandler, Raymond Felton, Tim Hardaway Jr., Kenyon Martin, Torrey Morey, Pablo Prigioni, Iman Shumpert, Chris Smith, J.R. Smith, Amari Stoudemire, and Ben-No Udrich. Now, I look at this team and I say, do they have any assets on this team? Where are his assets? What players do he have of value that he could possibly get something back in a trade? And honestly, there aren't a lot of assets there. You got Amari Stoudemire, who hadn't been the Amari Stoudemire of old at that time, and so you couldn't really get a lot for Amari Stoudemire. He wasn't playing complete seasons, and he was getting paid a lot of money. He was getting paid a superstar salary, but he wasn't able to produce at that level. So it's going to be hard to get something back for Amari. He's not an asset. He's also almost a liability. Kenyon Martin and Ron Artest, Metta World Peace, these two guys were toward the end of their career, and you probably got as much gas out of those two guys that you possibly could have gotten, so you wasn't going to get anything for those guys in the trade. Which leads me to my players of interest. The players of interest on that team would have been number one, Tyson Chandler. He had won a championship with the Dallas Mavericks. Mark Cuban refused to pay him, let him walk away, and the New York Knicks ended up picking him up. So he was probably the number one player that they could have gotten something for. And also a couple players that you may have been able to get something for would have been Raymond Felton, who was a starting point guard at that time, and J.R. Smith, because he at least had a resume from the time that he had spent in Denver with the Denver Nuggets. So when Phil Jackson comes in that first summer, he doesn't really do any free agent signing. What he does is he goes out and he hires Derek Fisher as the head coach. Now, Derek Fisher, I believe, had not been a coach in the NBA. He had been playing for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I think he came straight from the bench to the bench, so I don't know for sure if that's a fact, but I'm just trying to think back. I don't remember him actually being an assistant coach anywhere before taking that job. And he decides to make one trade that summer, his first summer there, and that trade was he traded Tyson Chandler and Raymond Felton to the Dallas Mavericks in return for Samuel Dalembert and Jose Calderon. Now, Jose Calderon was a guy who Phil Jackson touted as a great passer and a playmaker, so I really believe he brought him in to be the starting point guard. I just never saw Jose Calderon as being the starting point guard on a championship team in the NBA. When you're talking about Kyrie Irving and Chris Paul and John Wall and Isaiah Thomas and Kyle Lowry and guys like this, Reggie Jackson, I think if these guys see Jose Calderon on defense, they're going to have a field day. So he was never the answer for me. And then you bring in Samuel Dallenberg for Tyson Chandler. He's not a better scorer and he's not a better defensive player. So the only thing I say you could have been bringing him in for was maybe an expiring contract or something. But Tyson Chandler's contract wasn't that long. His contract would have been expiring anyway. So I don't really understand that move. Samuel Dallenberg had played for 4 teams in the previous 4 years before coming to the Knicks. He played with the Sacramento Kings, the Houston Rockets, the Milwaukee Bucks, and Dallas Mavericks, and then he ends up with the New York Knicks. So, not a very good trade. So anyway, they go into that first season, the 14-15 season. And during that season, Phil Jackson makes some moves, pretty much either dismantling the team or freeing up some cap space. One of the first moves that he makes is in January, he makes a trade. And in that trade, he trades J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert to Cleveland in a 3-team trade. And in return, the New York Knicks receives Alex Kirk, Lou Amerson, and Lance Johnson. I don't think that was a good trade for the New York Knicks as far as getting back players of value. And it's actually Lance Thomas. They aren't players of value, but, it is what it is. That's what they decided to do. And then J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert made it to the NBA Finals that year. And then the next year, which would have been this year that just passed, they actually ended up going on to win the NBA championship. So far, not so good for Phil Jackson and the moves that he's making. And also, there's internally things going on. There was an issue between Derek Fisher and another player from another team, which is not really heard of in the NBA, a coach and a player from another team. Derek Fisher had an altercation with Matt Barnes because he was allegedly dating Matt Barnes' ex-wife, and that situation got, pretty ugly and almost came to blows. And then internally, there was an alleged situation where Tim Hardaway Jr. Had almost came to blows with Derek Fisher because Derek Fisher was hitting on his girlfriend. And so the whole Derek Fisher thing was not working out for that first year. They did not make the playoffs, had a very, very poor season. And also that year in February, they bought out Amari Stoudemire, wasn't able to get anything or acquire anything back from him. So Phil just decided to pay him out. And so they gave him a buyout, and he ended up signing with the Miami Heat. So now, this brings us to the summer of 2015-2016. So now, because they had such a poor record, they do have the 4th pick in the draft coming up that year. I guess the situation with Hardaway Jr., who I was high on as a young player, and Derek Fisher had some validity to it because they ended up moving Hardaway Jr. to they moved him to the Atlanta Hawks, and I thought that was a bad move to let him go, and they ended up, I guess, subsequently picking up Jerrion Grant in that deal. And so now we in the second summer of free agency for Phil Jackson as the decision maker. With that 4th pick in that draft, he goes out and he drafts Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps Porzingis is a very good player. He is a highly touted player. He was the runner-up for Rookie of the Year to Karl Anthony Towns, and he seems to be a player that the New York Knicks may be able to build around moving forward in the future. He's a guy that's 7 feet or taller and has skills to put the ball on the floor. He can shoot the deep 3, play with his back to the basket, and we thought that he wasn't going to be a good defender, but because of his length, he's averaging almost 2 or 3 blocks a game, so he even turned out to be a pretty good defender in the NBA. So he was a diamond in the rough. So now they go and Phil Jackson starts for the first time to sign free agents, and the free agents that he brought in that summer after drafting Porzingis was Anthony Aflalo, Robin Lopez, Kyle O'Quinn, Derek Williams, and Kevin Seraphin. Not really a great cast of players. You're looking at like mid-level players, not of superstar caliber. With a guy like Carmelo Anthony, you would expect Phil Jackson to go out and bring in the Kyle Lowrys and the John Walls and the LaMarcus Aldridges of the NBA, but he wasn't able to do that in his first signing of true free agents. He just got some maybe mid-level players, guys that you kind of plug into the lineup, but nothing that you can really build around or put next to Carmelo and start to build a big three or two or four. So not so good as far as his free agent signings for that summer of 2015. So they go into the 2015-16 season. Things start out pretty rough. They aren't working out. The Knicks are struggling. Porzingis is the one bright spot because he looks very good, especially early on. Early on, he looked like the rookie of the year, but I think he kind of ran out of gas for a while toward the middle of the season. But that was the pretty much only promising thing that was coming out of last year's season was to see that Kristaps Porzingis was on his way to being a very decent NBA player. And so about 40 games in, Phil Jackson decides to pull the plug on Derek Fisher, and he gives the assistant coach, Kurt Rambis, who he has a relationship with from the Lakers, being on his bench with the Lakers, he gives him the interim head coach job for the remainder of the season last year. The New York Knicks struggle last season. They don't make the playoffs, and this summer they don't have high draft picks to go out and pick players, and so here we are at the summer that just passed, the summer of 2015, 2016. Phil Jackson goes out again in free agency because he doesn't have draft picks and he doesn't have the ability to go and draft a top quality player, young player coming out of the draft. So now he has to either build a team through trades or free agency. Now, these are the free agents that he brought in that summer. First, he makes a deal with Chicago, and he moves Robin Lopez and Jose Calderon and Jerry and Grant. They all go in a multi-team deal. They go to Chicago, and in return, New York receives Justin Holiday and Derrick Rose. Uh, it's an okay trade. Derrick Rose has not been the Derrick Rose of old. He's coming off an injury. He has shown some spots at that point of looking pretty good, but maybe not returning to the Derrick Rose that we used to seeing. But either way, at that point, it's an upgrade from Calderon, but it's not putting you in championship mode. I don't believe at that time. Then they go out and he commits to start signing free agents. He brings in Jakeem Noah. The Bulls released Jakeem Noah. He had been having some issues, had shoulder surgery, and missed a lot of games. So the Bulls decided to cut several ways with him, cut ties with him. They just didn't re-sign him. And so New York went out and Phil Jackson brings him and he signs him to a 4-year, $72 million contract, which is around $18 million per year. And then he also goes out and he signs Courtney Lee, and Brandon Jennings. He signs Brandon Jennings to a 1-year, $5 million deal. Brandon Jennings coming off of a injury that made him miss almost a whole season, and he's the guy that's trying to, come and recover some of the credibility that he had once as a player, and just trying to get through a full season and maybe see if things work out or not. So basically, just an experiment. So once again, he fails to bring in a top-notch quality veteran free agent to come and give Carmelo Anthony the opportunity to win a championship. He's consistently bringing in kind of like these mid-level players. And this year was the year of injury. He brought in, 3 players, Derrick Rose, Brandon Jennings, and Noah that you get at a discount. Well, not really Noah at a discount because you gave him $18 million a year, but you get these guys basically because it's a roll of the dice with all these guys because they all coming off of injuries. But, at the end of the day, you still got Porzingis. But they did do something pretty good this summer. They brought in a couple players that I really like, some young players. Number one was Willie Herman Gomez. Herman Gomez is a young power forward / center. The guy can put the ball on the ground. He can rebound. He has a really good touch around the basket, has good footwork. and they got him for 2 second-round picks that they sent off to Philadelphia for his draft rights. And he was a guy who played with Porzingis in Europe. And so moving forward in the future, it looks like he'll be a really good key piece to that team. And another European player that they got that they signed this year as a free agent who has never been in the NBA was Kuzminskis. And Kuz, he looks very good, very comfortable out there on the floor. And I like Herman Gomez, Kuzminskis, and Porzingis together. They look like a pretty good young uh, group of guys to maybe make some noise in the future. And Justice Holiday, as a young player, he has came up and looked pretty well. So with that being said, we've showed you guys the majority of the major trades that Phil Jackson has made with that team that kind of led us up to this day. And you realize that the only way to build a team in the NBA is through a trade, through drafting, or through developing of young players and free agent signings. So we're going to look at really quick what Phil Jackson has done. Phil Jackson, as far as free agent signings, I would give him a C minus for free agent signings. He hasn't been able to go out and sign any solid top-notch free agents. He only brought in some mid-level free agents. If you look at the roster that they have this year, with Courtney Lee and these guys, it is an upgrade from the team that he inherited and the players that I named around Carmelo in the 2013-14 season, but it's still not a team that's even making any noise or competing for a playoff spot right now in the Eastern Conference. So for that, you got to give him a C minus, and that's a modest grade for his free agent signings. Now, as far as young talent, this is where he has thrived. I like Holiday, I like Kuzminskis, I like Gomez, and I like Porzingis. So it's not a lot of teams that can say they got 4 young players that seem to be up and coming, like they'll be some consistent NBA players. So from that standpoint, I may give him a B for that, or maybe a C plus. He's been good at getting a couple of good young players in that they can build a team around, but that at the same time is not a help to Carmelo Anthony, because Carmelo Anthony is a guy that has to win now. His prime is almost over, pretty much. If he even has any prime left, his opportunity and his window to win a championship is really closing. So developing young talent is really not something that's going to help Carmelo. Now, from a draft standpoint, he really hasn't had a lot of draft picks in his 3 years with the Knicks. He drafted, I think, early with a second-round pick a couple years ago. He didn't really turn out to be much, but because Porzingis was a diamond in the rough, I got to give him at least a B for the draft. Now, I'm going to add another category, coaching. As far as coaching, I'm going to give him a D for coaching, because he's been there for 3 seasons, and in 3 seasons I can name 3 coaches that coached that team in the 3 years that he's been there. He's had Derek Fisher as a coach, he's had Kurt Rambis as a coach, and now the current coach is Jeff Hornacek. So in 3 years, he's had 3 separate coaches, so that's obvious that he's struggled with trying to make the right decision to bring in the right coach. So with that being said, we're going to bring it to a closure, and we're going to wrap it all up. Is Phil Jackson doing a good job with the New York Knicks? In my humble opinion, I say no. If you would give him a grade, at best, it would be a C, which is just average. And so, in my opinion, I don't think so. You can, give him a grade yourself, try to analyze and, post or comment on that. But on the last note, I want to say, what does this all mean for Carmelo Anthony? Maybe Carmelo Anthony was sandbagged by Phil Jackson. Who knows what the original intent of Phil Jackson was? But in my opinion, for you to bring in the guys that you brought in and not being able to surround Carmelo Anthony with a championship quality team in the 3 years that you were there, you knew that was his window of dominance, to really, really compete at a high level for the NBA championship. And now you say things like he's a ball hog, an offense stopper, and things of this nature. He's not the type of guy that's going to lead a team to a championship, and it's been his character since he was in Denver. Then why do you sign this guy to this deal and you keep him in New York from the beginning anyway? So Phil Jackson may have been a little bit disingenuous in keeping Carmelo there. He may have just brought and kept Carmelo there when he originally came in, because he knew had he let Carmelo Anthony go, that roster totally would have had not one player that the fans would have wanted to come out and see. So he may have held Carmelo Anthony's career hostage, but hopefully for Carmelo, when these trades go through, he'll land somewhere and have an opportunity to at least make his name in the playoffs before his NBA career is over. But on that note, fans and fellas, ladies and gentlemen, we'll say, as we always do, one life, one love, one God, peace.